It's a story about a guy named Willie and a woman named Anna. And Willie came from the South, and Anna came from the Northeast. They couldn't be more different. One, a staunch evangelical Protestant, the other, a great Polish Catholic girl from Rochester. Willie, his mother ran away when he was 3 years old, and his dad died of tuberculosis when he was 5 or 6. And so Willie wound up living in foster homes for his entire life until at the age of 17 he joined the Navy and learned how to be a man. Anna, her dad died from a heart attack when she was 5. And they didn't have any insurance, so they immediately went on the dole and wound up having to live in a little apartment above a butcher shop where Anna took care of her ailing mom until her ailing mom died of a botched mastectomy. They lived on the dole. They didn't have any health care. They wound up getting a rather average to below average doctor, but who was willing to work on indigent people. And so she had a mastectomy from breast cancer and died as the result of complications. Well, Anna decides at the age of 29 that she's had it with Rochester, New York. She wants to do something different in her life. So she moves to Hawaii, where she met this sailor named Willie. And they went on 3 blind dates, and then he was stationed off to the sea on an aircraft carrier, and they wrote letters back and forth every single day. And somewhere along that letter writing thing, they decided to get married, and they got married, and a year later I was born. I don't got the credentials of a lot of folks. I have no access to God, I have no access to the presidents, but I'm a frickin' poster child for the United Way. And there were so many times when my entire lineage could have been wiped out by various decisions, right down to deciding to get married after a letter writing campaign. But instead, Bill Toliver and Irene Anna Toliver raised 4 kids, all of whom are trying to do something good in the world, all of whom are trying to make a difference. So that name Toliver comes with a burden. When I was last here, a lot's changed since I was here. And I wanted to sort of review a few headlines that have happened to us in the last couple of years. There's always that amazing banking bubble that burst and sent the entire global economy in crisis. When I was here, when I was talking to a group of United Way folks in May, there was an outside chance we were going to elect an African-American president. Everybody was yodeling, yes we can. Things were looking up, and then boom, an explosion in the economy. The middle class is struggling. The difference between the haves and the have-nots is larger than it's ever been in a long, long time. Politicians, we're somewhere between yes we can and over my dead body. Preserving their careers over governing. Corporations using questionable ethics to drive for quarterly returns. I don't care if you want to look at Madoff. I don't care if you want to look at the real estate crisis. People started going crazy. There's a communications revolution unfolding around us. I've been asked at the end of this conversation if I might go over and answer a few questions on Facebook. I don't tweet because I'm a 47-year-old man, and I don't tweet. But I'm happy to answer some questions on Facebook. We recently witnessed, through cell phone technology, a revolution unfold in Iran. The Green Revolution unfolded in Iran before our eyes, and things, as they were happening, were being broadcast to us on the other side of the world, and we could watch this unfold. Terrorism, asymmetrical warfare. Ever since I last spoke to you, we've been at orange level of security. And then finally, our new president is helping us to understand and galvanize public opinion for a new war of choice. You look at all these things and say, man, that's a little bit of a tough fundraising environment. And in fact, you kind of get the sense that we're like all passengers on the Titanic, and there's a small group of us trying to make our way to the stern, just so we can hear the tapping of the wrench and know that we're going to make it. That's kind of what it's felt like, just pure survival of the fittest. But what if I was to tell you that these actually are not headlines from the last 2 years? These are headlines from over 100 years ago. The communications revolution was not the internet, but was in fact the telegraph. And you want to talk about a revolution? The telegraph was a frickin' revolution. It used to take a month to get information from one side of the United States to the other, or weeks to get information from the United States to England or Europe. With a telegraph, it went down to a matter of seconds. You look at the banking bubble, well, back then it happened to be around oil futures and cotton futures and things like that. You look at the gap between the haves and the have-nots. You look at terrorism and asymmetrical warfare. There were little revolutions breaking out all over the place. And so I want to talk very briefly, if I can, about 1848. Because all these things were unfolding. There was famine. There was horrible unemployment. There was homelessness. There was a major gap between people who had means, the aristocracy, and people who had literally nothing. And in 1848, the people decided to do something about it. A guy named Karl Marx wrote a little thing called the Manifesto, talking about the rights of workers and the experience of workers. Revolutions broke out all through Europe, and it was called the People's Spring. Do you know the play Les Miserables? It was written about this time in history, about this moment when people decided to gather their collective resources and act in unison to affect change in the world. And it was against the system. It was finding a way to help the least and the last and the lost among us. So it was called the People's Spring. It was also called, by a famous author, the turning point in history when history failed to turn. And I want to talk about that right now because in a lot of ways, it feels a little bit like that. All this pent-up potential. And as I said in my last time I was in front of this group of folks, there is no greater burden than that of a great potential. All this pent-up potential, all this possibility. If you look at it, and it was purely because of things like the telegraph, a French Revolution spun into an Austro-Hungarian Revolution, spun into a revolution in Berlin, spun into a revolution in Brazil, spun into a revolution in Sri Lanka. Literally the world was starting to say enough. We have to stop. We have to start treating the least and the last and the lost among us with some modicum of respect. We have to make sure people are fed and that they're clothed and that they have basic ability to go to school and that they have a basic fighting chance at doing something in their lives. Things like liberty were being discussed. And it fizzled out. Literally over the course of a year or so, it fizzled out. And the reason it fizzled out is because the governments and the aristocracies and the powers that be decided to segment and divide the audience and dole out bits and pieces of wants and needs to various groups of people, just enough Novocaine to get everybody to chill just a little bit, and the revolution went poof. Where did that Novocaine come from? It came from ethnic differences. One of the things that Europe had been experiencing, just as the United States had, was a lot of migration into various countries of Europe. And they started to look at it and say, let's make sure that the burgeoning lower middle class of Europeans get a little something something, and some of the people that we're exporting in don't get it. And what began to happen is racial divisions began to fester, and class divisions began to fester, and a middle class started to form, started to emerge, but it basically emerged by the application of Novocaine, not real change. It's a cautionary tale. Turning point in history when history failed to turn.